Well, last week we launched into this series entitled Aha, based on what we call the parable of the prodigal son. And all of us have had aha moments in our lives. I appreciate Linda sharing one of hers this morning. We've had multiple aha moments, and it's my prayer in this series that we would have additional aha moments as God is speaking to us in what we're learning about the parable of the prodigal son. What does aha mean? It means that you've had a sudden understanding or recognition or some type of resolution to something that you didn't understand before. Aha, I get it now. Or I understand it now. Aha, now I see what I didn't see before. Aha. Well, what did Goliath say when young David planted a stone into his brain? This is a child's joke, so please laugh at the punchline when I give it, okay? What did Goliath say when young David planted a stone into his brain? Answer? Well, nothing like that has ever entered my mind before. Thank you so much. Okay, I don't know if that was Goliath's aha moment. Sounds like it was. But all through the Bible, we read about aha moments. Abraham about to sacrifice his son. Moses standing at the burning bush, Jonah in the belly of a fish, Peter standing on water in the middle of a lake. Friends, here's the deal. God is a storyteller. God is a story writer. He loves stories. What we call the Bible is one big story. A story of a God who created us, who redeemed us, who is coming for us. A God who has a story for us, who wants to write our story. And he has a story that he wants to tell through our lives. And that story includes moments of aha, experiences where you come face to face with the purpose and the plan of God for your life. Moments where he wants to tell a story of when he became real to you in your life, when he became active in your life. He wants to tell the story of when he became the center of your life. And what's more, he wants the world to know that story. He wants the world to hear that story of transformation and change. In this series, throughout this series, we are encouraging you to pay attention to the aha moments of your life and to tell that story of how God got your attention, how he changed your life. Many of you already have one. And if you don't have one, my prayer that in this series is that you will have one. A moment when you recognize and realize that there is a God in heaven who has a story for your life that is good and full of hope. Well, in this series, we're going to revisit this over and over again. There are three phrases in the parable of the prodigal son that gives us a structure or an outline that guides our story. He came to his senses. He said to himself, he got up. He came to his senses, he said to himself, he got up. Say that with me. He came to his senses, he said to himself, he got up. Now, we're going to read the parable of the prodigal son. Last week, I read it out of the children's story book Bible, and all of you adults really liked that. Every week, I'm going to read the story out of a different translation or different book. And this morning, I'm using the Williams translation. How many of you have ever heard that? Of that, okay, just a couple. It's not a well-known translation. It's a very old translation, but it's a very accurate translation. Jesus tells three stories in Luke 15. Story of about a lost sheep, a lost coin, and a lost son. A lost sheep and a lost coin, and the extent to what people will go to find that lost sheep or that lost coin. And then he tells another story that begins this way. Then he said, there was a man who had two sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the property that falls to me. So he divided his property between them. Not many days after that, the younger son got together all he had and went away to a distant country. And there he squandered all his property by living in dissipation. Now, dissipation is not a word that we use very much anymore these days. Dissipation means riotous living, wild living. He partied it up. He had a great, yesterday I went to 3 weddings. I officiated 2 of them, and we ended the night in dissipation, okay? As much as a pastor can dissipate. I mean, the electric slide is about all I can take. But anyway, dissipation. Verse 14, after he had spent it all, a severe famine struck that country, and he began to suffer want. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, and he sent him to his fields to feed hogs. And often he craved to fill himself with the carob pods, which the hogs were eating, and nobody gave him a bite. Then he came to himself and said, how many of my father's hired men have more to eat than they need? And here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven in your opinion. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Just treat me like one of your hired men. So he got up and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, and his heart was moved with pity for him. And he ran and fell on his neck and kissed him affectionately. His son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your opinion. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Just treat me like one of your hired men. But his father said to his slaves, bring out at once a robe, yes, the finest one, and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. Take the fattened calf and kill it, and let us feast and celebrate, because this son of mine was dead and has come to life, was lost and has been found. Now, what we call in the Bible, and many of your Bible translations that you read, will title this section of the scripture the parable of the prodigal son. So when we think about the parable of the prodigal son, what do we think about? We think about the prodigal son. But I want to tell you, friends, that that's not a very good title to this story. This really isn't about the son. In fact, Jesus begins the story. There was a father who had how many sons? 2. There are 2 sons in this story. And so this story is not really about the sons. This story isn't about neither of them. This is not a story about a son who did his thing. This is a story about a father who did his thing. Jesus is telling us a story about the Father. In fact, the very reason Jesus came to this earth was to tell us about the Father. The way Jesus lived and the stories he told all pointed to what the Father was like. He didn't tell this story so that we could relate to the Son, which in many ways we do. No, he told this story so that we could understand the Father, which in many cases we don't. So he wants us to have an aha moment with the Father. Now, as I said, we've looked at these letters. AHA is an acronym for things that we're going to talk about through this series. And if you'll look at the word AHA, that first letter in the word, the letter A, stands for awakening. In this story, he came to his senses. Now, what does that mean, he came to his senses? Well, it means that he had at some point in the story departed from his senses. He lost his senses. He had senses at one point, and then for whatever reason, he no longer had senses. Have you ever experienced that in your life? Do you know somebody? Are you sitting next to somebody that has departed from their senses? You know, and we use phrases like, that doesn't make any sense. There's no sense to that, to what you're thinking or to what you're doing. Have you lost your senses? There was a father with sons, and he had provided for them a home. And the home was good. The home had everything they needed. But because we are sinners, it did not have everything they wanted. The younger son was being called by the distant country. The distant country was calling to him, talking to him, whispering to him. It was luring him. It was tempting him. The distant country was promising him. And just like Satan in the garden, speaking messages, you know what? Life is too risky in trusting it to the Father. You need to take charge of your own story. You need to write yourself a better script. Don't entrust your happiness to someone else. Take charge of your own destiny. Do your own thing. Live your own life. And so the son comes to the father with a distant country whispering in his ear, and he says, hey, Dad, when you die, I mean, you know this, I know this, everybody knows this, when you die, I'm going to get a boatload of money, but you know what? You're not dying. In fact, you're not even sick. I don't know. When is this going to happen? I mean, who knows? You may even outlive me, and I'm not getting any younger. A few weeks ago in the news, you might have noticed that Queen Elizabeth, celebrated the longest reign in the history of the United Kingdom. Her son, heir to the throne, Prince Charles, he is 66 years old. Will he ever get to be king? Does anybody really care in this country? Okay. The son says to the dad, I don't know how much time I have left. My best years are slipping away, and I should be happy. That's what the distant country preaches to us every day. You should be happy. You should have what you want. You deserve what you want. You deserve to be happy. You shouldn't let anyone keep you from what you want. Don't let anything or anyone keep you from being happy. Everybody deserves to be happy, right? And right now, Dad, you being alive is standing in the way of my good time. You're keeping me from being happy. I mean, I know I'm not going to get everything. I'm the younger son. In Middle Eastern culture, the younger son would probably have gotten about a third of the estate. And so he says, I understand that. I'm not going to get everything, but I have something coming to me, and I want it now, and I want to be able to do with it what I want. So if we could just pretend, we could all pretend like you're dead. Just say you're dead. And liquidate, why don't you just liquidate my portion of the estate and write me one big check? And adults, parents, you're hearing this? You have an estate. I mean, you're worth something. I don't know what you're worth. Maybe you don't know what you're worth, but all of your worth is not tied up in cash. I mean, you can't just write a check, for everything that you have assets and possessions and that sort of thing. So the question is, what would you have to do, parent, dad? What would you have to sell? What would you have to liquidate to give this son what he is asking for? Can you imagine that? Kids, go home and try this with your parents. See how far you get with it. The audacity, the brazenness, the disrespect, the offensiveness, the hurtful. There are so many words we could use, some of them inappropriate. The insensitive, you selfish little, how, if you were the parent, how dare you say this to me? The gall for you to come to me and say, you know what, let's just pretend you're dead. I'd like a share of what you've got. It belongs to me. Can you get the sense of this? And so we're all standing back waiting for the lightning to strike, right? And this is the shocking part of the story. It doesn't happen. The dad says, okay. Does whatever he has to do. Writes the check. Jesus doesn't go into the details, but you can just imagine what this dad had to go through to give this son what he wanted. But you know what? The father realizes he's an adult. He has choices. He has a free will. And I can't stand in his way of doing what he wants. He's going to exercise his free will. And so the kid takes the check and he takes off. Goes to the big city, buys a condo, a fancy car, lots of clothes, parties it up, lives in dissipation, collects lots of friends. And that's the best part of the distant country. You have lots of friends in the distant country, and you don't have to be a son, you don't have to be a brother, you don't have to be anybody you don't want to be. You can be whoever you want, you can do whatever you want as long as you have the resources to do it. But when the resources are gone, when the money's gone, the friends are gone. When the money's gone, the good time is gone. When the money's gone, the condo is gone, and the car is gone, and everything's gone. And put your Jewish hat on for just a moment, if you know Jewish culture, and imagine how offensive this part of the story would be, that he ends up in a field feeding pigs. Jesus would have a Jewish audience, which would indicate to them, this kid has hit rock bottom. I mean, he's lost everything. He couldn't get any lower. His life has just turned into one long, sad country song that he doesn't want to sing. And he's having an aha moment. He faces reality. He recognizes that his life has now become unmanageable. Have you been there? Boy, I hope you have. Because this starts your experience with God. A question you can't answer, a problem you can't solve, a hurt you can't heal, an emptiness that no amount of searching can satisfy. The place in your life where you recognize that life doesn't make sense left to yourself, where you can't make sense left in your own power. Most of us get there because of a disappointment or a difficulty, a loss or a failure. God uses a circumstance to create an awakening, an aha, be it spiritual, relational, financial, physical. It could be in your marriage, your parenting, your job, physical health, financial well-being. Something has happened, a hurt, habit, or hang-up. Doctors will tell you not to ignore the pain. I mean, if something is hurting that shouldn't be hurting, then you really should give attention to that, right? You need to wake up to what's happening. Awakening. Which leads us to the second letter in AHA, which stands for honesty. This son had a moment of honesty, acknowledging the consequences of his choices. On vacation a few weeks ago, one of the books I read was a biography of Blaise Pascal, which is one of the most influential thinkers, not only in the Renaissance period, but in all of human history. He was an incredible thinker, and he exemplified the term Renaissance man. Here's one of his quotes in one of his writings. He says, "All men seek happiness. This is without exception. Whatever different means they employ, they all tend to this end. This is the motive of every action of every man." And we know this. We understand this. Nobody wants to be unhappy. And I want to tell you this morning, friends, God is not anti-happy. We were made in the image of a God who is good, who is gracious, who blesses. We live the gospel, which is good news. The Bible talks about us walking in the joy of the Lord. But friends, that is not dissipation. Dissipation and happiness or joy are not the same thing. There is a difference between pleasure and happiness, or pleasure and joy. This son wanted to be happy, but he was seeking it in pleasure, and he wasn't getting what he was seeking. Friends, happiness and pleasure are not the same thing. Just last week, I celebrated my birthday. I have done that many times. And as celebrations sometimes go, you go too far in a celebration. One piece of double fudge chocolate cake is good. It is very good. It is heaven. There's nothing better. Double fudge chocolate cake is pure pleasure on a plate. And it is to be enjoyed. And so you eat that first piece and you think, you know what? Double your fun. And so the second piece of chocolate, you know what a second piece of chocolate cake is? I'll tell you. It is the false promise of a repeated pleasure. It doesn't quite give you what the first piece gave you. But hey, it's your birthday. And there's one piece left on the plate. Chocolate cake should never go to waste. It's never as good the second day. So why not triple the pleasure? You've been there, haven't you? The first piece, it's really good. The second piece, not so good. Third piece, you're sick. Jesus said this in John 10:10. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that you might have life and have it to what? To the full. Friends, Jesus is telling us a story about a father who gives and a distant country who steals. This is a story about a father who loves and a distant country that destroys. And at some point, we need to come to our senses and we need to say to ourselves, we need to admit that there's a difference between happiness and pleasure. And that the pleasure we seek does not give us the happiness we ultimately want. Now, for those of us who have entered have ever entered into a structured recovery program, be it Celebrate Recovery or AA and its sister organizations, the very first thing we learn is that we admitted we were powerless. Realize I am not God and I am powerless. I am powerless. Say that with me. I am powerless. Say it again. I am powerless. Apart from the Father, I am powerless to secure my own happiness. Apart from the Father, any pleasure I pursue will not give me what I seek. I must admit that within my own power, I destroy. In the pursuit of my own pleasure, I destroy the potential for happiness. It makes a mess of my life. My life becomes unmanageable. This son said to himself, my dad's servants live better than me. My dad has slaves. They eat better than me. My dad treats his slaves better than my boss treats me. And so he has, this is the third letter in the word, action. He got up. Say that with me. He got up. He came to his senses. He said to himself, he got up. He starts writing his speech. Because you can't just go home, right? After what he's asked for and after what he has done with what he's asked for, you can't just show up at the door and say, hey, I'm back. No, he's thinking about what he's done. And he's thinking about what his father is thinking about what he's done. And he's thinking, if I was dad, I'd be thinking this. I'd be mad. I'd be angry. I'd want payback. I'd want to take it out on me. I'd want revenge. And so I better have a really good speech like, I am not worthy to be your son. Just make me a slave, a servant. I don't want back into the house. I just want a job. And so he gets up, and I'll put it on the screen, verse 20. Here's how it goes. So he got up and went to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. I want you to note the phrase, filled with compassion. Now, at this point in the story, he has not heard the story, but he was filled with compassion. At this point, the son hasn't had the opportunity to give his speech, but he is filled with compassion. The kid hasn't groveled or begged or done anything, but while he was still a long way off, the father was filled with compassion. I don't want you to miss this. Before the son ever spoke, the father was already loving. What does God think about when he thinks about you? Have you ever thought about that? When you think about God thinking about you, what do you think God thinks about you? Those of us who have read the Bible, we kind of understand this logically. And if we process this biblically, we know that this isn't really the right way to think about this, but it's human nature. And so we think God thinks about us the way we think about us. And this is generally how it goes. You've had a pretty good day. I mean, you got up and you read your Bible. Maybe you read a devotional. Maybe you even journaled and you prayed. You spent time with God that morning. You came to church today, okay? You were nice to your kids. You were good to your spouse. This past week, you made some really good decisions. You were honest. You put in a full week's of work, and so you've earned your pay, and you feel when you've had a good day, you think God is happy with you. But when you've had a bad day, you lost your temper, you fudged on the truth, maybe relapsed in your addiction. When you're not happy with yourself, you assume God is too. When we do good, we feel good, we think good about ourselves, and we think that God thinks the same. But when we're bad, we feel bad, we think bad about ourselves, and we assume God feels the same. We tend to live and think as if God takes his cues from us. We think God thinks of us the way we think of us. But what if that wasn't the case? What if God didn't take his cues from us? What if God operated on a different system? What if he used a different scale when he thought of us? You may not be a Christian this morning and you've never really thought about God thinking about you. You may be a Christian this morning who isn't living very Christianly right now, and you really don't want to know what God is thinking of you. Or maybe you're hitting it on all cylinders right now. I mean, your life is in a pretty good place. You've had a pretty good day, and so you're not too worried about this. And some of you are thinking, Pastor Tim, you don't even know me, so what do you know about God? What do you know that God thinks about me? Well, here's what I know. I don't need to know you to know what God thinks of you. I just need to know God. This verse says, while he was still a long way off, he was filled with compassion. Now, how can he be filled with compassion? He hasn't even heard the speech yet. He hasn't even groveled yet. Because, friends, the Father doesn't care about the speech. He cares about the Son. When God thinks of you, it isn't based on you. In fact, elsewhere in the Bible, it says, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this, while we were still sinners. In other words, while we were still a long way off. Before we ever gave our speech, before we ever wrote our speech, before we ever thought of writing a speech, before we ever realized we needed a speech, while we were still a long way off. In your deepest, darkest, worst day, you failed and failed again. And it doesn't make sense to you why you keep doing what you keep doing. But while you were still sinning, did it ever cross your mind that your Heavenly Father was thinking of you? And when he was thinking of you, he was filled with compassion. While you were still a sinner, Christ died for you. In other words, you didn't even know this was happening for you at the time because you were sinning. You were fine with sinning. You weren't thinking about anything else but sinning. So before you ever thought about God thinking about you, God was taking the whole sin issue off the table because he didn't want this issue standing in the way of what he thought about you and how he felt about you. Friends, it doesn't matter who you are, where you've been. It doesn't matter what you do or what you've done. The Father calls for the robe and the ring and the calf and says, no way are you a servant. You've never been a servant. You will never be a servant. You've always been my son. You will always be my son, which means that the Father had never really thought differently about him. He was always a son. The Father had always considered him a son. See, that's what this is all about. This is just one long love story about a father who looks for lost sheep and lost coins and lost sons and never stops loving them. And who wants this story to be their story. He wants it to be your story. He wants to find you in this story. So, question. What is the distant country for you? What is calling you away from the Father? Money? Sex, power, popularity, comfort. Friends, the distant country is where you seek happiness and find emptiness. The distant country is where you pursue pleasure, but it never gives you what you ultimately want because the distant country will always leave you homeless. To go to the distant country means you must leave home. And so the distant country is any area of your life where you have walked away from a God who thinks of you, and when he thinks of you, he is filled with compassion. And that, my friend, is the biggest aha of your life. That's the aha moment that changes everything. So what is God doing in your life? What is God saying in your life? What is the story that God is writing for you? Stories are powerful and they need to be told. And if you don't have a story, you can start right now by telling God that you are done with the distant country and you want to come home. We're encouraging you to share those stories. If you are on social media, and if you'll use the hashtag #ConnectAtGrace, then that will allow other people to see your story, to hear your story. It doesn't have to be detailed and it doesn't have to be long. It's just simply, how has God gotten my attention, and what is God telling me? What is God teaching me? How is God correcting me? How has God used this particular circumstance or this situation to show his love for me? And how has that changed my life? What has happened in your life because God had placed an aha moment, has gotten your attention, and it has included you back home? The story of the prodigal son is your story. God has never stopped thinking of you. And when he thinks of you, he is filled with compassion. Would you pray with me?